They didn't just block her from training, they tried to erase her. From the moment she set foot on that base, the mission was clear. Keep her out, shut her down, break her spirit. But some battles don't need permission. Behind every setback, she was calculating, watching, waiting. And when the moment came, she didn't hesitate. 7 targets. Now, the question isn't whether she should have been trained, it's why they were so afraid of what she could become. Before we begin, send a quick wave in the comments. Tell me your city, your country, your vibe. It's amazing how stories like this echo across the world. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Fort Braxton's sprawling training grounds as Staff Sergeant Reese Camden shouldered her heavy duffel bag. Her boots crunched against the gravel path leading to the Delta Force training facility, each step bringing her closer to what should have been the proudest moment of her military career. The massive concrete building loomed ahead, its weathered walls telling stories of countless soldiers who had trained within. Reese took a deep breath, squaring her shoulders. She had earned this spot through years of dedication and exceptional performance. Her father's voice echoed in her mind. Stand tall, keep your eyes sharp, and never let them see doubt. As she pushed through the heavy metal doors, the familiar scent of gun oil and sweat filled her nostrils. The main hall was quiet, except for muffled voices coming from a nearby office. Reese approached the administrative desk where a stern-faced clerk barely glanced up from his computer. "Staff Sergeant Camden reporting for Delta Force training assignment, sir," she said, her voice clear and confident. The clerk's eyes finally lifted, widening slightly at the sight of her. He shuffled through some papers with deliberate slowness. "Wait here," he muttered, disappearing into the office where the voices had been coming from. Moments later, the door swung open. Master Sergeant Kurt Brennan emerged, his imposing figure filling the doorframe. Gray peppered his temples, and numerous scars marked his weathered face. His steely eyes assessed Reese with cold calculation. "So you're Camden," he said, his tone flat. Behind him, 2 other soldiers appeared, Sergeants Rick Dalton and Tony Vasquez. Dalton's stocky frame and blonde crew cut contrasted with Vasquez's leaner build, but both men wore identical scowls. "Yes, Master Sergeant," Reese replied, maintaining eye contact despite Brennan's intimidating presence. "There must be some mistake," Brennan said, turning to his companions. "Looks like someone in personnel can't tell the difference between combat roles and support staff." Vasquez snickered, and Dalton crossed his arms, his stance radiating hostility. "No mistake, sir," Reese said firmly. "I've completed all qualifying requirements and received direct orders for Delta Force training." Brennan's jaw tightened. "Listen carefully, Camden. Papers and test scores don't mean anything here. This isn't some desk job where you can bat your eyes and get your way. This is Delta Force, the elite of the elite." "I'm aware of what Delta Force represents, sir," Reese responded, fighting to keep her voice steady. "That's exactly why I'm here." "Training starts at 0500 hours, Brennan said, his voice dripping with disdain. "Vasquez, show her to the barracks. The empty one at the end should be appropriate." Vasquez stepped forward, gesturing for Reese to follow. As they walked down the corridor, his silence spoke volumes. He led her to a small, isolated room at the far end of the building, separated from the main barracks by a maintenance area. "Here's your 5-star accommodation," Vasquez said with a smirk. "Don't worry about joining us for evening chow. Wouldn't want you to feel uncomfortable." The door closed behind him with a heavy thud, leaving Reese alone in the sparse room. A single bed, a metal locker, and a desk were the only furnishings. The window overlooked an empty parking lot, and distant shouts from the training grounds filtered through the glass. Reese set down her duffel bag and sat on the bed, its springs creaking under her weight. The reality of her situation began to sink in. She had expected challenges. The physical demands, the technical requirements, the psychological pressure. But this was different. This was systematic exclusion, a wall of prejudice built brick by brick through years of ingrained discrimination. Her fingers traced the name tape on her uniform, CAA, MDEN, the legacy of her father's CIA career weighing heavily on her shoulders. She had chosen this path to forge her own identity, to prove herself on her own terms. Now, staring at the bare walls of her isolated room, doubt crept in like a shadow. The sound of laughter echoed from the main barracks, Dalton's distinctive guffaw carrying through the walls. Reese stood and began unpacking her gear with mechanical precision, each item finding its designated place. The routine helped center her thoughts, but couldn't completely dispel the knot forming in her stomach. As night fell over Fort Braxton, Reese lay on her bed, fully dressed, staring at the ceiling. The day's events played on repeat in her mind. Brennan's dismissive stance, Vasquez's contempt, Dalton's silent hostility. She had known it wouldn't be easy, but the reality was hitting harder than expected. Her father had taught her to read situations, to analyze threats and opportunities. Right now, every instinct told her that mastering combat skills would be the least of her challenges. The real battle would be against something far more insidious, the deeply rooted prejudices that had already marked her as an outsider. Sleep eluded her as she listened to the unfamiliar sounds of the facility settling into night. Tomorrow would come too soon, bringing with it the first true test of her resolve. In the darkness of her isolated room, Reese Camden questioned not her abilities, but whether any amount of skill or dedication could overcome the barriers she faced. Dawn broke over Fort Braxton with military precision. Reese arrived at the training grounds 15 minutes early, her uniform crisp, despite a mostly sleepless night. She found the other trainees already assembled, Brennan standing before them with a clipboard. "Today we're running advanced tactical formations," Brennan announced, his eyes sliding past Reese as if she were invisible. "Dalton, take point. Vasquez, you're on rear security." Reese stepped forward, ready to take her position, but Brennan held up his hand. "Camden, the supply shed needs inventory. Those paper-pushing skills of yours should come in handy." "Sir, I'm qualified for tactical training," Reese said, keeping her voice level. "My records show—" "Your records?" Brennan's laugh cut through the morning air. "We all know how those records got stamped, don't we? Daddy's connections open a lot of doors." Snickers rippled through the group. Reese felt heat rise in her cheeks but maintained her composure. "My father has nothing to do with my qualifications, sir." "Supply shed. Now." Brennan's tone left no room for argument. "Unless you'd like to explain to command why you're refusing a direct order?" Reese spent the morning counting boxes of ammunition and cataloging equipment, while the sounds of training exercises drifted through the shed's thin walls. When she finally emerged, covered in dust, she found the training area empty except for a lone figure working at a communications station. Sergeant First Class Marcus Thompson looked up as she approached, his warm brown eyes meeting hers briefly before returning to his equipment. He was tall and lean, his movements precise, as he adjusted various dials. "They're at the obstacle course," he said quietly, without being asked. "Though I doubt they'll save you a spot in line." "Does everyone here just accept this?" Reese asked, unable to keep the frustration from her voice. Marcus's hands stilled on the equipment. "Not everyone," he said carefully, "but speaking up has consequences." The pattern continued through the week. While others practiced advanced combat maneuvers, Reese found herself assigned to clean weapons, organize files, or perform equipment checks. Each task came with a pointed comment about finding appropriate roles for her skills. The whispers grew louder in the hallways. "Daddy's little girl playing soldier. Must be nice having CIA connections. Bet she's never fired anything bigger than a paintball gun." Reese responded by arriving earlier, staying later, and using every spare moment to maintain her physical training. She ran extra miles when the training grounds were empty, practiced hand-to-hand combat against dummy targets, and studied tactical manuals during her meal breaks, which she took alone, having been made unwelcome in the mess hall. One evening, as she worked through a series of combat drills behind the barracks, she noticed Marcus watching from his communications station. He seemed to be there more often lately, his presence a quiet contradiction to the hostile environment. "Your form is good," he said finally, setting down his headset. "But they'll never see it if they don't let you demonstrate it." "I'm not giving them the satisfaction of quitting," Reese replied, throwing another combination of strikes. "This isn't normal hazing," Marcus warned. "Brennan and his crew, they're systematic about this. They've done it before." Reese paused, wiping sweat from her forehead. "How many others?" "3 that I know of. All gone within a month." Marcus glanced toward the main building. "They make it look like the person just couldn't handle the pressure. No official complaints, no paper trail." The next morning proved Marcus right. Reese arrived to find her locker had been tampered with, her equipment scattered, and her tactical vest missing crucial components. When she reported it, Brennan's response was immediate and predictable. "Sounds like someone's not keeping track of their gear," he said, making notes on his clipboard. "That's a serious violation of protocol, Camden. Might have to report this up the chain." "This was deliberate sabotage, sir," Reese stated firmly. "Accusations without proof?" Brennan's voice carried across the training room. "That's not very team-oriented of you. Maybe you're not cut out for unit cohesion." As Reese gathered her scattered equipment, she caught Marcus's eye across the room. His expression confirmed what she already knew. This wasn't random harassment or typical military testing of new recruits. This was a coordinated campaign to break her down, to force her out before she could establish herself. The realization should have been discouraging, but instead it strengthened her resolve. They weren't just challenging her abilities. They were attacking the very principle of equal opportunity in elite units. Her father had taught her to recognize when a fight was bigger than personal pride, and this one certainly was. As she reassembled her gear, Reese began to notice other details. The way Brennan's inner circle operated with unusual autonomy, the late-night meetings in his office, the secured communications that seemed excessive for routine training operations. Something deeper was going on at Fort Braxton, something that perhaps explained why they were so desperate to maintain their exclusive control. The discrepancy jumped out at Reese like a flashing red light. She sat at her small desk in the barracks, comparing the tactical manual she'd been given against notes she'd taken during her previous training. The protocols for secure communications in hostile territory were completely different, dangerously different. Her heart began to race as she pulled out more documents, spreading them across her desk. The radio frequencies, the encryption methods, even the basic hand signals. They were all wrong. Not just outdated, but fundamentally incorrect in ways that could get someone killed in the field. Reese reached for her phone and pulled up the official military database she still had access to from her previous posting. Her fingers flew across the screen as she cross-referenced the information. With each verification, her suspicion grew stronger. The manuals and protocols she'd been given were deliberate misinformation. She worked through the night, methodically documenting every discrepancy. By morning, she had filled an entire notebook with evidence. This wasn't just harassment anymore. This was dangerous sabotage that could compromise military operations. The training facility was quiet when she arrived, the early morning sun casting long shadows across the parade ground. She found Brennan in his office, surrounded by his usual entourage. Dalton and Vasquez lounged against the wall, while Brennan sat behind his desk, reviewing paperwork. "Master Sergeant Brennan," Reese said, standing at attention in the doorway. "I need to speak with you about the training materials I've been issued." Brennan barely glanced up. "What about them, Camden?" "They're wrong, sir. Deliberately wrong." She stepped forward, placing her notebook on his desk. "The communications protocols, the tactical responses, they don't match current military standards. They're dangerous." The room went silent. Dalton and Vasquez exchanged looks, straightening from their casual poses. Brennan slowly put down his pen and leaned back in his chair. "Are you suggesting we don't know how to train our operators, Camden?" "I'm stating a fact, sir. These materials could get someone killed in the field." Reese opened her notebook, pointing to specific examples. "The encryption protocols are 5 years out of date. The emergency extraction procedures contradict standard operating procedure. The radio frequencies dash. Enough." Brennan's fist came down hard on the desk. He stood up, his imposing frame casting a shadow over Reese. "You want to know the truth, Camden? I'm protecting my boys." Protecting them? Reese maintained her ground, despite his intimidating stance. "You think I'm going to let them rely on someone like you in the field? Someone who got here through Daddy's connections?" Brennan's voice dripped with contempt. "Someone who'll freeze up when the bullets start flying and get my men killed." Other unit members had gathered in the hallway, drawn by the commotion. Reese was acutely aware of the audience, but she didn't back down. "Your personal prejudices don't justify endangering operators' lives, sir. These protocols dash." "My personal prejudices?" Brennan stepped around the desk, getting right in her face. "I've lost men in the field, Camden. Good men. Real soldiers. I'm not going to let some political correctness experiment compromise my unit's safety." "The only one compromising safety here is you, sir." Reese's voice remained steady despite her racing heart. "By providing false information, you're done here." Brennan's voice cut like a knife. "Get out of my office before I write you up for insubordination." "This isn't over, sir." Reese gathered her notebook, her hands steady despite her internal trembling. "These discrepancies will be reported through proper channels." "Go ahead." Brennan's laugh was cold. "File your complaint. See who believes Daddy's little girl over a decorated combat veteran." Reese turned and walked out, keeping her posture rigid despite the urge to run. The gathered soldiers parted silently, their expressions a mix of discomfort and curiosity. She made it around the corner before her legs started shaking. Leaning against the wall, she took several deep breaths. The confrontation had confirmed her worst suspicions. This wasn't just about keeping her out of the unit. Brennan was willing to compromise military protocols, to endanger operators' lives, all to maintain his prejudiced control over the unit. She looked down at the notebook in her hands, filled with evidence of deliberate sabotage. Brennan was right about one thing. Filing a formal complaint would be an uphill battle. His reputation, his combat record, his network of loyal supporters, they all worked in his favor. But he had made a crucial mistake by openly stating his discriminatory motives in front of witnesses. By admitting to deliberately providing false information, he had given her something concrete to work with. Now she just had to figure out how to use it effectively. Reese straightened up, squaring her shoulders. She had been trained for difficult missions, for situations where the odds seemed impossible. This was just another tactical problem to solve, another obstacle to overcome. She would find a way to address this through proper channels, to expose the dangerous corruption without compromising her integrity or her mission. Colonel Patricia Hayes' office felt different from the rest of Fort Braxton. While most of the base maintained a stark military efficiency, her space featured carefully chosen artwork and a small collection of plants that softened the institutional atmosphere. Reese stood at attention before the colonel's desk, her notebook of evidence clutched tightly in her hands. "At ease, Staff Sergeant Camden." Colonel Hayes gestured to one of the chairs. "Have a seat and tell me what's troubling you." Reese sat down, placing her notebook on the desk. "Ma'am, I've discovered serious irregularities in the training materials I've been given by Master Sergeant Brennan's unit." The colonel's expression remained neutral as Reese detailed the discrepancies, the outdated protocols, and the confrontation with Brennan. She laid out her evidence methodically, just as her father had taught her, clear, concise, and irrefutable. "And you have witnesses to Master Sergeant Brennan's statements?" Colonel Hayes asked, examining the notebook. "Yes, ma'am. Several unit members were present when he admitted to deliberately providing incorrect information." Colonel Hayes leaned back in her chair, studying Reese with experienced eyes. "Staff Sergeant, how long have you been in the service?" 8 years, ma'am." "Then you understand how things work in specialized units like this?" The colonel's voice softened. "What you're describing is serious, and under different circumstances, it would warrant immediate action." Reese felt her heart sink at the word but that hung unspoken in the air. However, Colonel Hayes continued, filing formal complaints against a decorated combat veteran like Brennan, especially given your father's position, well, it would be seen as crying favoritism rather than fighting discrimination. But the evidence could be explained away as training exercises, testing your attention to detail. The colonel shook her head. And the witnesses? They're Brennan's men. Do you really think they'll back your version of events when push comes to shove? Reese gripped the arms of her chair. So I'm supposed to just accept this? Let them compromise operational safety? What I'm saying, Staff Sergeant, is that there are better ways to fight this battle. Colonel Hayes stood and walked to her window, looking out over the training grounds. A formal complaint, even with solid evidence, would mark you. It would follow you throughout your career. Every posting, every promotion board, they'd see you as a troublemaker, someone who doesn't understand how to work within the system. The weight of the colonel's words settled heavily on Reese's shoulders. What's the alternative, ma'am? Prove yourself through performance. Excel despite their obstacles. Show them that their prejudices are unfounded. Colonel Hayes turned back to face her. It's not fair and it's not right, but it's the reality of the situation. Reese stared at her notebook, feeling the trap closing in around her. Fight the injustice and destroy her career, or stay quiet and let discrimination continue unchecked. I'll take your evidence under advisement, Colonel Hayes said, her tone gentler, and I'll keep an eye on the situation, but for your own sake, I strongly recommend focusing on your training rather than filing complaints. Yes, ma'am. Reese stood, recognizing the dismissal in the colonel's voice. Thank you for your time. Walking back across the base, Reese felt more alone than ever. The morning sun did nothing to warm the chill that had settled in her chest. She had hoped, foolishly perhaps, that the system would support her if she just followed proper channels. Rough meeting? The quiet voice startled her. Sergeant First Class Marcus Thompson fell into step beside her, his usual reserved expression showing hints of concern. That obvious, huh? Reese tried to smile but couldn't quite manage it. Hayes gave you the work within the system speech? When Reese nodded, Marcus sighed. Yeah, she's given that one before. They walked in silence for a moment before Marcus spoke again. Listen, I know it's not much, but I've got access to the current tactical manuals if you need them. And I might be able to help you get into some of the training sessions Brennan's been blocking you from. Reese studied him carefully. Why would you help me? Because I've seen too many good soldiers get pushed out by this kind of thing. Marcus shrugged. And because what Brennan's doing isn't just wrong, it's dangerous. His offer of support, though subtle, felt like the first real ally she'd found since arriving at Fort Braxton. Thank you, she said quietly. Don't thank me yet. Marcus glanced around before continuing. This won't be easy. Brennan's got a lot of influence, and changing things from within is a slow process. Reese nodded, understanding both what he was offering and what he was warning her about. The path ahead would require patience, resilience, and careful navigation of the system's unwritten rules. As they reached the training facility, Marcus peeled off with a slight nod, maintaining his professional distance. Reese watched him go, feeling the weight of her choices pressing down on her. The colonel's warning about career consequences warred with her innate sense of justice, leaving her caught between impossible options. The morning sun cast long shadows across the firing range as Reese checked her equipment for the live fire exercise. Something felt off about the weight of her tactical vest, but she couldn't quite place what was wrong. She'd triple-checked everything as usual, knowing Brennan's team would be looking for any mistake to exploit. Listen up, Brennan's voice carried across the range. Today's exercise simulates close-quarters combat under pressure. You'll be moving through the course with live ammunition. No room for errors? His eyes lingered on Reese as he spoke those last words, a subtle smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. She felt a chill run down her spine despite the warm morning air. The course looked straightforward enough, a series of concrete barriers, doorways, and windows set up to mimic an urban environment Reese would need to navigate through while engaging multiple targets, all while wearing full tactical gear. "Camden, you're up first," Brennan announced, breaking protocol. Usually, the most experienced operators ran the course first to demonstrate proper technique. Reese moved to the starting position, running through her mental checklist one final time. The weight distribution in her vest still felt wrong, but she couldn't delay without looking incompetent. "Begin!" Brennan's command cracked through the air like a whip. Reese moved forward, her rifle at the ready. The first target appeared, and she squeezed off 2 clean shots. The paper target showed both hit center mass. She advanced to the next position, her movements precise and controlled. As she rounded the first barrier, something shifted in her vest. The familiar weight of her ammunition pouches suddenly felt loose. Before she could react, her entire tactical loadout began to slip sideways. The vest's main securing strap had completely separated from its mounting point. Reese's training kicked in. She immediately called out, "Cease fire! Equipment malfunction!" But the momentum of her movement combined with the failing vest caused her to stumble. Her rifle jerked upward as she fought to maintain control. A live round discharged, missing her head by inches and embedding itself in the concrete barrier behind her. The range went deadly silent. Reese's hands shook as she carefully secured her weapon and removed the faulty vest. Upon inspection, the strap hadn't worn out or torn. It had been deliberately cut, leaving just enough material to hold initially, but fail under stress. "Looks like someone didn't check their gear properly," Brennan called out, his voice dripping with false concern. "Could have gotten yourself killed, Camden. Maybe this kind of work is too dangerous for you." Reese stared at the cut strap, her mind racing. This wasn't an accident or oversight. This was a calculated attempt to cause a serious accident, or worse. "Everything okay here?" Marcus's voice cut through the tension as he approached from the observation area. His eyes went straight to the damaged vest in Reese's hands. "Just the equipment failure?" Brennan said smoothly. "We'll need to file a report about Camden's negligence in equipment maintenance." "I'd like to see that report," Marcus replied, his tone carefully neutral. "Since I'm responsible for documenting all range safety incidents." Brennan's eyes narrowed slightly, but he maintained his composure. "Of course. We'll have it on your desk by end of day." He turned to the rest of the unit. "Exercise terminated. Clear your weapons and head to the classroom for debrief." As the others filed away, Marcus stayed behind, waiting until they were alone before speaking. "Let me see that vest." Reese handed it over, watching as he examined the cut strap with experienced eyes. "This was deliberate," she said quietly. "Yeah, it was." Marcus's jaw tightened. "And it could have killed you." "Why are you helping me?" Reese asked, finally voicing the question that had been nagging at her. "You're taking a risk getting involved." Marcus was quiet for a moment, still holding the damaged vest. "Because I've seen this before. Brennan and his inner circle, they've got their own idea of who belongs here. Anyone who doesn't fit their mold either gets pushed out or..." He gestured to the vest. "They did something similar to you?" "Not as direct. But yeah, I've been on the outside ever since I refused to participate in their training methods with new operators." Marcus set the vest down carefully. "They couldn't force me out. I've got too much experience in communications that they need, but they made sure I knew my place." Reese studied him, seeing for the first time the weight he carried from years of witnessing this behavior. This isn't just about discrimination anymore, is it? They're willing to go further. "Much further," Marcus agreed. "Brennan's got something bigger at stake here. Normal prejudice doesn't drive someone to attempt murder." The word hung in the air between them, making the morning's events feel even more chilling. "We need to be smart about this," Marcus continued. "Document everything. Build a case. But watch your back. Today proved they're willing to make accidents happen." Reese nodded, her mind already working through the implications. "Thank you," she said softly, for not looking the other way. "Yeah, well," Marcus managed a slight smile. "Maybe it's time someone stood up to them. Just be careful. Very careful." They stood in silence for a moment, both understanding that they'd just formed an alliance against something far more dangerous than simple military harassment. The cut strap of the tactical vest lay between them like evidence at a crime scene, proof that Brennan's campaign of intimidation had escalated into potentially deadly territory. The emergency alarm blared through Fort Braxton's halls at 3:15 in the morning. Reese was already awake, reviewing tactical manuals in her quarters when the sound cut through the quiet night. She jumped to her feet, heart racing with both anxiety and excitement. This was what she'd trained for. Colonel Hayes' voice crackled over the base-wide intercom system. "All Delta Force operators report to Command Center immediately. This is not a drill. I repeat, this is not a drill." Reese grabbed her pre-packed deployment bag and sprinted to the command center, joining the growing crowd of operators filing into the briefing room. The atmosphere crackled with tension as Colonel Hayes strode to the front, her face grave. "We've received credible intelligence about an imminent terrorist threat to our diplomatic facility in Ankara, Turkey," Hayes announced, pointing to satellite imagery displayed on the main screen. "A cell linked to known extremist groups is planning an attack within the next 72 hours. We deploy in 90 minutes. Reese's pulse quickened as she studied the facility layouts and threat assessments. This was exactly the kind of operation she'd prepared for countless times in training. She began mentally reviewing entry points and defensive positions, already formulating tactical approaches. "Master Sergeant Brennan will coordinate team assignments," Hayes continued. "Get your gear ready and report to the airfield at 0500 hours. As the room emptied, Reese noticed Brennan lingering behind with Colonel Hayes. She couldn't hear their conversation, but Brennan's gestures were animated, urgent. Hayes' expression grew increasingly concerned as she listened. 20 minutes later, while Reese was checking her equipment one final time, a junior officer appeared at her door. "Staff Sergeant Camden, Colonel Hayes needs to see you immediately." Reese's stomach tightened as she entered Hayes' office. Brennan stood off to the side, his face carefully neutral. "Camden," Hayes began, her tone carefully measured, "I've received some concerning reports about your readiness for this deployment. Master Sergeant Brennan has raised several valid points about your limited experience in live combat situations." "Ma'am, I've completed all required training and qualifications," Reese responded, fighting to keep her voice steady. "My scores are well above standard requirements." "Training scenarios are different from actual combat operations," Hayes replied. "This mission is too critical to risk any uncertainties. You'll remain at Fort Braxton for additional training and evaluation." The words hit Reese like physical blows. "Colonel, I'm prepared for this. I've trained specifically for this type of operation." "This isn't a request, Staff Sergeant." Hayes' tone hardened. "Master Sergeant Brennan has expressed serious concerns about your ability to function effectively under real combat conditions. As your commanding officer, his assessment carries significant weight." Reese glanced at Brennan, catching the slight smirk that flickered across his face before disappearing behind a mask of professional concern. "Your time will come, Camden," he said, his voice dripping with false sympathy. "Better to wait until you're truly ready than risk compromising the mission or your teammates' safety." Reese wanted to argue, to defend herself, to expose Brennan's manipulation, but she knew it would only make things worse. "Yes, ma'am," she managed to say. "Understood." "Dismissed," Hayes said, already turning her attention to deployment papers. Reese walked out of the office, her legs feeling wooden. She made it around the corner before leaning against the wall, trying to process what had just happened. All her preparation, all her training, all her determination, none of it mattered because Brennan had poisoned the well. "I heard?" Marcus's quiet voice startled her. He stood a few feet away, his own gear packed for deployment. "This isn't right." "No, it's not," Reese agreed, straightening up and wiping away tears she hadn't realized were falling. "But what can I do? Brennan's got Hayes convinced I'm a liability." "Something's off about this whole situation," Marcus said, glancing around to ensure they weren't overheard. "Brennan's been pushing unusually hard to keep you off this mission. Even for him, this feels extreme." "He's finally gotten what he wanted," Reese replied bitterly. "I'm sidelined while the unit deploys without me." Marcus checked his watch. "I need to get to the airfield. But listen, keep your eyes open while we're gone. Brennan's behavior? There's more to it than simple discrimination. Document everything you notice, no matter how small it seems." Reese nodded, grateful for his support, but still devastated by the exclusion. "Be careful out there." "You too," Marcus replied meaningfully. "Sometimes being left behind isn't the worst position to be in." Reese watched from the shadows of the barracks as the unit loaded onto transport vehicles bound for the airfield. The pre-dawn darkness matched her mood as she observed Brennan confidently directing his team, knowing he'd successfully maneuvered to keep her away from whatever was really going on. The vehicles pulled away, leaving Reese alone with her thoughts and a growing suspicion that Brennan's desperate efforts to exclude her from this mission weren't just about gender bias or personal prejudice. Something bigger was at play, and she was now in a unique position to find out what it was. Marcus Thompson sat alone in the dimly lit communications center, his fingers flying across the keyboard as he analyzed the encrypted data streams from the past month. The digital clock on the wall showed 2:17 in the morning, but he couldn't sleep. Something about Brennan's behavior before deployment had been nagging at him. The quiet hum of servers filled the room as Marcus dug deeper into the communication logs. His eyes narrowed as he noticed an unusual pattern. Regular bursts of encrypted data being transmitted during off hours, always when the facility was nearly empty. "That's weird," he muttered, tracing the signal paths. The transmissions were carefully masked, bouncing through multiple servers to hide their destination. But Marcus hadn't spent 15 years in military communications to be fooled by amateur tricks. Layer by layer, he peeled back the encryption. His hands began to shake as the decoded information appeared on his screen: training protocols, combat procedures, classified tactical manuals, all being transmitted to foreign IP addresses. "Oh my God," he whispered, scrolling through file after file of leaked military secrets. The timestamps matched perfectly. Every transmission had occurred during Brennan's late-night training reviews. Marcus's mind raced back through the past months, remembering how Brennan always insisted on handling certain documents personally, how he'd reacted when Reese started questioning the discrepancies in their tactical manuals. He pulled up Reese's original reports about the conflicting intelligence protocols, the ones Brennan had dismissed as proof she wasn't ready. Looking at them now, Marcus saw what Brennan must have realized. She'd been unconsciously mapping the very discrepancies that would have exposed his operation. She was getting too close, Marcus said aloud, the truth hitting him like a physical blow. The discrimination, the sabotage, it was all a cover. His fingers trembled as he dialed Reese's number. When she answered, her voice was alert despite the late hour. "Marcus? Aren't you supposed to be in Turkey?" "Listen carefully," he said, keeping his voice low. "Can you meet me at the old maintenance shed behind the motor pool? Now? Don't let anyone see you." 20 minutes later, Reese slipped through the shed's door, her eyes adjusting to the darkness. Marcus stood by a workbench, his laptop casting a blue glow on his face. "What's going on?" she asked, noting his tense expression. "Everything we thought we knew was wrong," Marcus said, turning the screen toward her. "Brennan's been selling classified information to foreign contacts. Look at these transmissions." Reese leaned in, her green eyes widening as she absorbed the evidence. "These are the same protocols I found problems with." "Exactly," Marcus nodded. "You were mapping his leaks without realizing it? That's why he fought so hard to discredit you. You were getting too close to exposing his operation. The discrimination was just a convenient cover, Reese said, her voice tight with anger. Everyone was so ready to believe he was just another sexist commander, they never looked deeper. He played us all, Marcus agreed, used our own assumptions against us. Even Colonel Hayes bought into it completely. Reese's hands clenched into fists as she scrolled through the data. The equipment sabotage, the false intelligence, the deployment block. It wasn't about forcing me out, he was trying to eliminate a threat. Your analytical skills made you dangerous, Marcus said. Your father's CIA background probably scared him too. He couldn't risk you putting the pieces together. And now he's leading a critical mission with a diplomatic facility at stake, Reese added, her face paling. After selling God knows how many of our tactical procedures to potential enemies? Marcus ran a hand through his hair. The discrimination campaign was brilliant, in a twisted way. It created the perfect smokescreen. Everyone was so focused on the gender issue. No one looked for another explanation. And I played right into it, Reese said bitterly. Spent all my energy fighting the wrong battle. You couldn't have known, Marcus assured her. None of us saw it. Brennan's been doing this for months, maybe years, building his reputation while selling us out piece by piece. They stood in silence for a moment, the weight of the revelation settling over them. The quiet was broken only by the distant sound of a patrol vehicle making its rounds. What do we do now? Reese asked, her voice steady despite the shock. We take this up the chain of command. Way up, Marcus replied. Beyond Hayes, beyond Fort Braxton. This is bigger than discrimination or harassment. This is treason. Reese nodded, her analytical mind already shifting gears, adapting to this new understanding of their situation. Everything she'd experienced over the past months took on a different meaning now. What she'd thought was a battle against prejudice had actually been something far more sinister. He's not just threatening my career anymore, she said grimly. He's threatening national security, and he's about to lead a team into what could be a compromised operation. Marcus closed his laptop, plunging the shed into darkness. Now you understand why I needed you to see this immediately. We're not just fighting for your place in the unit anymore. No, Reese agreed, her voice hardening with determination. We're fighting to expose a traitor. The news hit Fort Braxton like a thunderbolt on a clear day. Reese was in the mess hall when the first reports came in, picking at a breakfast she couldn't taste. The room fell silent as Colonel Hayes entered, her face ashen. 7 members of Delta Team Alpha are missing in action, Hayes announced, her voice carrying across the stunned silence. Their extraction went wrong. We lost contact 6 hours ago. Reese's fork clattered to her tray. Her mind immediately went to the classified intelligence Brennan had sold, the compromised tactical procedures that would have revealed every detail of their standard extraction protocols. Marcus caught her eye from across the room, his expression confirming her worst fears. This wasn't just a mission gone wrong. This was the direct result of Brennan's treachery. Within hours, more details emerged. The team had walked straight into an ambush. The enemy knew exactly where they would be, knew their protocols down to the letter. 7 operators captured, including Rick Dalton and Tony Vasquez. The same men who had helped Brennan torment her for months. Reese paced the communications center while Marcus worked his contacts, gathering information through back channels. The captured team members were being held in a remote compound. Their captors had already released a video, showing the soldiers bound and bloodied, with threats of execution if their demands weren't met. The official response is moving too slowly, Marcus reported, hanging up his phone in frustration. State Department's involved now. They're talking about diplomatic channels, negotiation teams. They don't have time for diplomacy, Reese said, her voice tight. Those execution threats aren't bluffs, not with this group. She watched the rescue planning unfold over the next 24 hours, growing increasingly frustrated as bureaucratic roadblocks emerged. Every hour brought new complications. jurisdictional disputes, political considerations, concerns about international incidents. The intelligence is solid, she argued during an emergency briefing. We know where they're being held. We have satellite confirmation of the compound's layout. Every minute we wait puts them at greater risk. But the system moved at its own pace. Forms had to be filed, approvals obtained, committees consulted. The same bureaucracy that had failed to spot Brennan's treason was now failing his victims. Reese found herself staring at the photos of her captured teammates pinned to the briefing room wall. Despite everything they'd done to her, she couldn't abandon them to die. Their prejudice had masked Brennan's crimes, but they weren't the real enemy. They were soldiers who had trusted their commander, just as she once had. In her quarters that night, Reese spread out detailed maps of the region. Her father's CIA training echoed in her mind. Lessons learned since childhood about tactical infiltration, counter-surveillance, and rescue operations. She had the skills. She had the intelligence. What she didn't have was permission. A knock at her door made her quickly cover the maps. Marcus entered, carrying a thick folder. "Latest intel update," he said, then lowered his voice. "The official rescue operation is still at least 72 hours out, minimum. If it gets approved at all, they'll be dead by then," Reese replied flatly. Marcus nodded, then carefully placed a small USB drive next to the folder. Complete satellite scans of the area, guard rotations, patrol patterns, everything we have. He met her eyes, just in case anyone needed that information. Reese stared at the drive, understanding the implicit message. "You know what I'm thinking about doing?" "I know you're going to do what needs to be done," Marcus answered. "Just like you've always done." He turned to leave, then paused. "The supply sergeant owes me a favor. The armory will be minimally staffed tonight, just saying." After he left, Reese sat for a long moment, weighing her options. Going in alone would be suicide by any normal standard, but she had advantages her captive teammates didn't. Complete knowledge of the compromise protocols, CIA-level infiltration training, and the element of surprise. No one would expect a single operator to attempt a rescue. She looked at the maps again, her mind already forming plans. Standard operating procedures would get her teammates killed. But she could turn Brennan's treachery against their captors. They would be expecting military responses based on the intelligence they'd bought. She would give them something completely different. The faces of her captured teammates flashed through her mind. Their mockery, their exclusion, their blind trust in Brennan. None of that mattered now. They were soldiers in danger, and she had the skills to help them. Reese began methodically preparing her gear, knowing she was about to risk everything. Her career would be over, regardless of the outcome. Best case, she'd face court-martial. Worst case, she'd never make it back to face charges. But as she checked her weapons and memorized the compound layout, she felt an odd sense of clarity. For months, she'd fought to prove herself within a system that was rigged against her. Now she would prove herself by going outside that system entirely, not for recognition or acceptance, but because it was the right thing to do. The lives of 7 soldiers hung in the balance. The official channels had failed them. The system had failed them. She wouldn't. Reese sat in her darkened quarters, staring at her father's old satellite phone. She hadn't used it in years, but she'd always kept it charged, just in case. Her fingers traced the worn edges before dialing the number she'd memorized as a teenager. "Uncle Jack?" "It's Camden's daughter." She kept her voice low, though she'd already swept the room for surveillance devices. "I need help." Jackson Myers had been her father's closest friend in the CIA, though he'd never officially existed in any government database. Within an hour, he'd connected her with 3 other ghosts from her past, retired operatives who owed her father favors. "Your dad saved my life in Kandahar," one of them told her over an encrypted line. "Whatever you need, it's yours." Through these shadow channels, detailed intelligence began flowing in. satellite imagery sharper than anything available through military channels, guard rotation schedules, names and backgrounds of the terrorist cell members, even architectural plans of the compound from when it had been a local government building. Marcus found her at midnight, surrounded by data streams on multiple tablets. "I've got the communication gear you asked for," he said, setting down a heavy case. "Modified to avoid standard military frequencies. They won't be monitoring these bands." Reese looked up from a thermal imaging scan. "Thanks. This is more than I hoped for." She hesitated. "Marcus, if this goes wrong—" "It won't," he interrupted, pulling up a chair. "But if you're about to give me some noble speech about not being implicated, save it. I'm already in this as deep as you are." She managed a small smile. "Fair enough. Help me make sense of these patrol patterns?" They worked through the night, piecing together everything her father's old network had provided. The compound security was heavy, but predictable. 7 terrorists, just as their intelligence had indicated, operating in rotating shifts of 3. They kept their prisoners in the basement level, using the building's original holding cells. "Your father taught you well," Marcus observed, watching her plot infiltration routes with practiced efficiency. "This is way beyond standard Special Forces training." Reese nodded, remembering countless weekends spent learning skills no child should need to know. "He wanted me to be prepared for anything. Said the world was dangerous for people who fought for what's right." She traced a line on the map. "I used to think he was just being paranoid. Now I understand." "He'd be proud of you," Marcus said quietly. "Doing this for people who didn't exactly welcome you with open arms. They're still soldiers, still part of the team, whether they accept me or not." She checked her watch. "I need to move soon. The longer we wait, the more likely they'll start executing hostages." Marcus helped her gear up, double-checking every piece of equipment. The lightweight tactical suit was non-standard issue, another gift from her father's connections. It offered better protection than military gear while allowing more mobility. "The communication setup is ready," he reported, adjusting her earpiece. "I'll be able to guide you through any blind spots in the compound, feed you real-time intel from the thermal scans." Reese performed one final weapons check. "If this works, I'll probably never wear this uniform again." "If this works, you'll have saved 7 lives. That matters more than any uniform." She shouldered her pack, lighter than standard combat gear but packed with specialized equipment, more gifts from the shadows of her father's world. Tools and tactics that would let one person do the work of a team. "Your father had a saying," Marcus mentioned as she prepared to leave. "Something about the right person in the right place?" Reese paused at the door. "Sometimes one person in the right place can do more than an army in the wrong one. He used to say that when I asked why he worked alone so often." She checked her watch again. Time to find out if he was right. Marcus grabbed her arm. "Reese, be careful out there. These aren't training exercises anymore." She met his concerned gaze. "I know. But this is what all that training was really for. Not fitting in or proving myself to them. Being ready when it really matters." They shared a long look, both aware of how much had changed between them since her arrival at Fort Braxton. From distant colleagues to trusted allies. Perhaps something more, though neither was ready to name it. "I'll be on comms the whole time," he promised. "You won't be completely alone out there." Reese nodded, then slipped out into the darkness. The night air carried a hint of dawn, just hours away. Somewhere in the distance, 7 soldiers were waiting for rescue, not knowing their salvation would come from the teammate they'd rejected. She moved silently across the base, her father's training making her practically invisible to the regular patrols. All those childhood lessons, all those skills she'd sometimes resented learning, they had led her to this moment, to being the right person in the right place. When it mattered most, the compound's outer wall loomed ahead as Reese moved through the pre-dawn shadows. Her heartbeat remained steady just as her father had taught her. Fear was natural, but control was essential. 3 guards on the north perimeter. Marcus's voice whispered through her earpiece. 2 moving west, 1 stationary. Reese pressed against the wall, her dark tactical gear blending with the shadows. The first 2 guards passed within feet of her position, their boots crunching softly on gravel. She waited until their footsteps faded, then moved toward the stationary guard. He never heard her approach, a precise chokehold, applied with textbook pressure, and he slumped silently. She eased him down, securing him with zip ties. No casualties unless absolutely necessary, another of her father's rules. Main entrance has 2 more, Marcus reported. 3rd target is in the security office. Reese retrieved a small canister from her gear. The knockout gas was another CIA tool, unavailable to regular military units. She rolled it through the partially open door, counting seconds as it silently dispersed. When she entered, both guards were unconscious at their posts. She secured them quickly, then moved toward the security office. The 3rd terrorist was slumped over his monitors, affected by the gas that had filtered through the ventilation system. "That's 4 contained," she whispered. "Where are the other 3? "Basement level, near the holding cells. They're getting agitated. Something's made them nervous." Reese checked her watch. The compound's backup generator would be cycling soon, a brief moment when emergency lights would flicker. She moved toward the basement stairs, every sense alert. The generator shifted right on schedule. In the momentary darkness, she moved. The first of the remaining 3 terrorists went down before the lights stabilized. Another precise chokehold leaving him unconscious and secured. 2 left. They were shouting now, aware something was wrong. One moved toward the stairs while the other pressed a gun against a prisoner's head. Rick Dalton, one of Brennan's inner circle, who had made her training hell. "Don't make me kill him!" the terrorist shouted into the darkness. Reese activated another piece of her father's specialized gear. The sound dampener created a bubble of absolute silence in a 10-foot radius. In that artificial quiet, she moved like a ghost. The terrorist on the stairs never saw her. A swift strike to a precise point, and he crumpled. 6 down, 1 to go. The final terrorist was growing desperate, guns still pressed against Dalton's head. The other prisoners, including Tony Vasquez and 4 more team members, watched in terrified silence. Reese had 1 chance. She rolled another gas canister, but this one was different. Instead of knockout gas, it released a brilliant flash and a disorienting pulse. Her tactical goggles protected her eyes as she moved. The terrorist staggered, his gun hand wavering. That split second was all she needed. A precise strike disarmed him, followed by a series of lightning-fast blows that left him unconscious on the floor. 7 targets neutralized, she reported to Marcus. All prisoners secure. She moved quickly to free the captives, starting with Dalton. He stared at her with a mixture of shock and disbelief as she cut his bonds. "Camden?" he croaked. "How? Why?" "Because we're a team," she said simply, moving to free Vasquez, "even when some of you forgot that." Within minutes, all 7 prisoners were free. None of them seemed to know quite what to say to their rescuer. These men who had excluded her, doubted her, and tried to drive her out had just witnessed what she was truly capable of. "The extraction team is 10 minutes out," Marcus reported in her ear. "Local authorities have been notified about the secured terrorists." Reese did a final sweep of the cells, checking each freed prisoner for serious injuries. They were battered and dehydrated, but alive. "You took down 7 terrorists by yourself," Vasquez said, his voice carrying a note of awe, "without killing any of them." "Killing should be a last resort," she replied, echoing her father's words. "Precision and control take more skill than brute force." Dalton stepped forward, his usual arrogance replaced by genuine respect. "We were wrong about you, Camden, all of us. What you did here—" "Save it," she cut him off, but not unkindly. "Right now we need to focus on getting everyone out safely. We can talk about the rest later." The sound of approaching helicopters filled the air. Reese led the group toward the extraction point, her mission complete. 7 terrorists neutralized, 7 soldiers rescued, all without a single fatality. As they moved through the compound, she caught fragments of whispered conversations among her former tormentors. They were seeing her clearly for the first time. Not as an outsider to be rejected, but as the most capable soldier among them. The rising sun painted the sky in shades of pink and gold as the extraction team arrived. Reese watched her rescued teammates board the helicopters, knowing that everything would be different now. Not because she had proven herself to them, but because she had proven something far more important to herself. Back at Fort Braxton, the debriefing room buzzed with tension. Colonel Hayes sat at the head of the table, her expression stern as she faced the rescued team members and the woman who had saved them. "Staff Sergeant Camden," Colonel Hayes began, "you violated multiple protocols with your unauthorized rescue mission. However, given the circumstances and the intelligence that's come to light, we need to discuss something more pressing." She nodded to Marcus, who stepped forward with a laptop. "The evidence is irrefutable, Colonel," Marcus said, pulling up encrypted communications and financial records. "Master Sergeant Brennan has been selling classified training protocols and mission details to foreign contacts for the past 18 months. The ambush that led to the team's capture wasn't a coincidence. It was orchestrated using the intelligence he provided." The room erupted in shocked murmurs. Brennan, who sat handcuffed at the far end of the table, maintained his stony silence. "That's not all," Marcus continued. "His campaign against Staff Sergeant Camden wasn't about gender discrimination. He recognized her analytical abilities as a threat to his operation. The discrepancies she noticed in the training materials, those were his altered protocols, designed to mislead potential investigators." Rick Dalton stood up, his face flushed with anger. "You used us," he said to Brennan. "You manipulated our biases to cover your crimes, and we fell for it like idiots." "What I don't understand," Tony Vasquez interjected, "is how Camden managed to take down 7 armed terrorists without any casualties. That goes beyond standard military training." All eyes turned to Reese. Colonel Hayes leaned forward. "I think it's time we addressed that, Staff Sergeant. Your personnel file doesn't tell the whole story, does it?" Reese took a deep breath. "No, ma'am. My father is Jonathan Camden." The name sent another ripple through the room. Even Brennan's composure cracked slightly. "The ghost?" Dalton whispered. "Your father is the ghost?" Jonathan Camden was one of the most effective covert operatives in CIA history, Colonel Hayes explained for those who didn't know. His methods of non-lethal neutralization became legendary in intelligence circles. "He trained me from childhood," Reese said quietly. "Not because he wanted me to follow in his footsteps, but because he knew the world I would face. Every technique I used in that compound, the silent approaches, the precise pressure points, the specialized equipment, I learned from him. I joined the military to forge my own path, to serve openly instead of in the shadows. But I never forgot his training." "That's why you didn't kill any of the terrorists," Vasquez realized. "Your father's philosophy about precision over lethal force." "The ghost's daughter," Dalton shook his head, then smiled. "No wonder you made us all look like amateurs." Colonel Hayes stood up. "Master Sergeant Brennan, you are hereby relieved of duty pending court-martial for treason, conspiracy, and attempted murder." She nodded to the MPs at the door, who moved to escort him out. "Staff Sergeant Camden," Hayes continued, "while your methods were unorthodox, your actions saved 7 lives and exposed a serious security breach. More importantly, you've demonstrated the kind of leadership and integrity this unit desperately needs." Dalton and Vasquez exchanged glances, then stood at attention. "Permission to speak, Colonel?" "Granted." "We'd be honored to serve under Staff Sergeant Camden's command," Dalton said. "Both of us have witnessed firsthand what real leadership looks like. She saved our lives when she had every reason to let us rot." The other rescued team members stood as well, adding their voices in support. Reese felt something shift in the room, not just acceptance, but genuine respect. Colonel Hayes smiled. "Well, Staff Sergeant Camden, are you ready to lead a team that finally recognizes your true value?" Reese stood before the military tribunal, her posture straight and confident as she delivered her testimony against Brennan. The evidence was overwhelming. Encrypted communications, financial records, and the testimony of the rescued team members. When the verdict came down, it was decisive. Guilty on all counts. 25 years in military prison, no possibility of parole. As Brennan was led away in chains, his once commanding presence diminished by defeat, Marcus stepped close to Reese. "Justice served," he said softly, his hand brushing against hers. 2 weeks later, Colonel Hayes called Reese into her office. The morning sun streamed through tall windows, highlighting the colonel's newly reorganized desk, a visible sign of the changes sweeping through Fort Braxton. "Staff Sergeant Camden," Hayes began, then smiled. "Though that won't be your rank much longer, I'm recommending you for promotion to Master Sergeant." Reese's eyes widened. "Thank you, ma'am." That's not all. Hayes stood and walked to a wall map showing global deployment zones. "I've been authorized to form a new integrated special operations unit. We're breaking down the old barriers: gender, background, specialized training paths. We need someone who understands both traditional military excellence and innovative tactical approaches." She turned to face Reese. "I want you to lead it." "You're offering me command?" Reese asked, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "You've proven yourself not just as a warrior, but as a leader. The way you handled the rescue mission showed tactical brilliance. More importantly, you demonstrated the kind of moral courage we need to reshape our special operations community." Through the office window, Reese could see Marcus working in the communications center. He looked up, catching her eye, and smiled warmly. Their connection had deepened since the rescue mission, built on a foundation of shared principles and mutual support. "I accept," Reese said firmly. 3 months later, Reese stood before her first training class. 20 recruits, men and women from diverse backgrounds, stood at attention. Among them was a young woman who reminded Reese of herself just months ago, eyes bright with determination despite the weight of others' doubts. "Welcome to Special Operations Advanced Tactical Training," Reese began. "You're here because you've proven your skills, your dedication, and your courage. But those aren't enough." She paced the line, making eye contact with each recruit. "In this unit, we value innovation over tradition, merit over prejudice, and integrity above all." Marcus, now her second-in-command and partner in more ways than one, stood at the back of the room. Their relationship had blossomed naturally, built on respect, trust, and shared experiences. They understood each other in a way few others could, both having fought against systemic barriers, both choosing principle over popularity. "Some of you have faced discrimination," Reese continued. "Others have benefited from old systems of privilege. None of that matters now. What matters is your willingness to learn, to adapt, and to support each other. Because in the field, the only thing that counts is competence and character." Rick Dalton and Tony Vasquez, who had requested transfers to her unit, nodded in agreement from their positions as training officers. Their transformation from skeptics to supporters symbolized the broader changes taking hold. You'll learn advanced combat techniques, strategic thinking, and specialized skills. But most importantly, you'll learn to see beyond surface differences to recognize true talent and leadership. During the afternoon's first training exercise, Reese worked closely with each recruit, demonstrating the precise techniques her father had taught her. She showed them how to move silently, strike effectively, and think 3 steps ahead. But more than physical skills, she emphasized the mental discipline that made exceptional operators. As the sun set over Fort Braxton, Reese and Marcus walked together through the training grounds. Their fingers intertwined naturally, comfortable with displaying their relationship, now that they no longer served in the same direct chain of command. "You know," Marcus said, "watching you with those recruits today, it's amazing how much has changed in such a short time." Reese squeezed his hand. The changes were overdue, but they needed a catalyst. "They needed you," he corrected. "Your strength showed others what was possible. Your integrity exposed what needed to change, and your leadership is building something new." They stopped at the edge of the parade ground, where just months ago Reese had stood alone, an outsider fighting for acceptance. Now she stood as a respected leader, a mentor, and a symbol of positive change. "We're building it together," she said, turning to face him. "All of us who believe in doing what's right, no matter the cost." Marcus pulled her close, their foreheads touching. "Together," he agreed softly, before closing the distance for a kiss that spoke of shared victories, mutual respect, and a future bright with possibility. Thanks for spending a moment here with me. If this story touched you, let's keep this connection going. Hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.